So they're constantly trying to produce content for their human audience, but also for the algorithmic curator.
The algorithmic curator is a machine, right?
Right. It's just code.
Right.
Yeah.
It's code.
The platform wants to show you things that you are going to engage with because that's what's going to keep you on their app. The platforms are in competition with each other for user time because they all make money by showing you an ad interspersed within that feed. So the platform has its incentives. And then the content creators who are investing all of this time making content also want to be paid.
But how does that interface with political extremism?
If you're putting out a nice neutral conversation, some audiences might like that. But if you're putting out something where you're getting into an argument, there's a brawl, there's a moment of like you owned your enemy saying something crazy or being provocative, that is one of the things that gets a lot of engagement. When we click that like button, that sends a signal that this is something that other people might want to see also. And in aggregate, a whole bunch of people engaging with content that's very sensational, very provocative, that's where you start to see political extremism content getting a lot of engagement and pickup from the crowd, which makes the algorithm decide that it is something worth showing to still more people.
That's Renée DiResta explaining to the Bulwark's Mona Charon why America went crazy. I first learned about Renée's research from Lawrence Lessig in episode 4 of this podcast.
It's only when the algorithms come onto the field and they start looking across the range of creativity and they say, you and you and you come to the front. Why? Because your content is going to get people angry, to engage and to want to watch more and to go down rabbit holes of insanity. You know, if you want to get the book version of this piece, Renée DiResta's book, Invisible Rulers, is a really powerfully fantastic unpacking.
I just wanted to say I loved the book so much. I learned so much from it.
Appreciate that.
All right, well, maybe you forgot that I messaged you that I wanted to start with Mike Benz.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't want to do that now because it's such a beautiful day. I want to start with a flock of birds.
Okay, yeah.
This really beautiful metaphor.
Memorations.
Yeah, for the way that social media architecture sort of navigates our experience. And I wonder if you could explain that for us.
Sure. So memoration is something that I think everybody has seen. If you've ever been outside at dusk, those flocks of starlings, usually massive clouds of birds that careen around the sky, and they move seemingly like directionlessly. They don't have a place that they're going. And I read about it, and it turned out that the birds see approximately, the theory is, the 7 birds nearest to them. And they take their cues based on the kind of inputs of the 7 birds nearest them. I thought it was such a great metaphor as I would watch things trend on Twitter, because it doesn't hit everybody all at once. It hits a small number of people. You'll see something that says like trending for you, it used to say, and it would show you like 2,000 people are talking about this tweets are in the trend. So it'd be very small before it blew up. And it was always interesting to me because it would sort of steer your attention, right? Whatever you were doing, all of a sudden, this was the thing that you wanted to pay attention to. And even if you didn't go to Twitter and open the app with the intent of talking about that topic, your attention was just steered based on what the kind of collective behavior of the people in your community, or even just the people on the platform, were talking about or thinking about that day.
Well, what makes that beautiful natural metaphor a bit scary is that we now have algorithms controlling which 7 birds that you see in your peripheral.
Exactly. I think people are starting to realize just how important curation actually is on Twitter after Elon took it over. There was a lot of focus on moderation, right? On what comes down or what is left up at the end. And I always thought this was sort of an interesting thing, because moderation is to sanitize the environment, to try to keep it palatable for people to be in, right? The maximum number of people, it's sort of trying to set norms for the greatest number of users. When what matters more for the user experience in the immediate moment is what's curated for you. It's what you see. What is the ethical way to decide what to rank, what to curate, and what to show people? For a while, platforms would just make that determination based on attention, what was most likely to get attention. And this was how this question of, does social media lead us to be more angry? Does it show us things that are more sensational? Does it show us things that are going to lead to harassment of a particular person who happened to say the wrong thing at the wrong moment in time, right? Cancel mobs function because of that ability to, to just kind of curate the thing that everybody's mad at a given moment in time. Like, that's how they work, right? And so that phenomenon of what is curated for you, what is your attention directed at, is actually profoundly important. And that's, again, that's a function of curation. And what the seven birds that are pushed into your field of view are entirely dependent on an algorithm that you have no control over. So while we can fight about moderation all day long, that experience, that direction of your attention is not a function of moderation at all. It's entirely a function of what's curated for you.
Well, you said curating who everyone is mad at. And, when I started a podcast that was about wrestling's impact on culture and politics, I didn't expect to be talking about algorithms. But in a lot of ways, that is what wrestling does. It curates who you're mad at, right? They
Right.
script. I don't know if you're familiar at all.
Vaguely. I remember it was like a thing in elementary school where like the boys would talk about it on the bus, the plot lines. And I never watched it myself, but no, I'm familiar with the general concept.
Well, you use another phrase. It's about a partnership between the propagandist and the perpetually aggrieved.
Yeah.
Basically, there's a pact between the performer and the crowd. All will pretend something that is false is actually true. The performers pretend and the crowd pretends. And then if you control who everyone's mad at, and this is why they say wrestling is a political project, because by controlling who the bad guy is and who the good guy is, you're actually able to marshal a mob if you want to. So in politics, the mob will believe any lie and they'll believe it so completely. And that's one of the things that you write about, like with the big lie about the election. People didn't just say, okay, well, that's over. Let's go back to our lives. They have to move to a new conspiracy theory as soon as possible.
Yeah, to keep the plot line going. And also, once you have invested time in creating a character, like it's world building. There was a book that came out, the phenomenon of augmented reality games, and QAnon, for example, as this ARG, because it gives people a sense of discovery and involvement. You can be the person who figures out the clue of the day, and then the influencer will boost you and you get cred and clout within your community. And maybe you even kind of build up that cred and clout over time. You gradually rise through the ranks and become kind of influential in the space yourself. When some of these guys they start very small. A lot of the right-wing influencers in 2016 who amassed some attention had maybe 30,000 followers then. They've got several million now. That can translate into subscriptions. They can turn themselves into media. They can be sponsored by various entities if they want to go that route. So it's just a way to both have clout and respect within the community, and then also potentially to monetize that clout and respect in a variety of ways. Some of them, like Dan Bongino now, has just become the deputy director of the FBI. And he was sort of known as like this, he had a career in the Secret Service and other places, then became really better known as like a podcaster, right? Like a lot of these conspiracy theories, honestly. So that incentive structure is always there, particularly if you're kind of bored, right? And particularly during COVID, everybody was sitting at home doing nothing. This is a thing that really becomes, both during the election, during COVID, 2020, 2021 is this period of peak time for this, as people are sitting home, they're angry, they are, their lives are in turmoil in many cases. And this politics of resentment, this creation of characters and villains, once those villains are established, once you have that ability to marshal a crowd in response to resentment or anger or an ability to target particular people, you don't just let that go. And so after the 2024 election, right, so during the campaign, you might recall, allegations of election fraud were rampant, right? And then all of a sudden that stopped, that went away. We stopped talking about it. And that's because the people who were riling up the crowd, alleging that the election was going to be stolen in 2024, when Donald Trump won, all of a sudden those conspiracy theories, we're not going to talk about that now. And now we have new things to focus on, like we're pulling line items out of random budget databases and getting mad at those. Right? We have a new set of villains. We have random people at USAID who got random grants that are being misinterpreted, and we just keep the machine going, one after another, after another, after another, and people forget what the outrage of the prior day was because there's always something new, and you can just keep that rage cycle going, shift that focus over and over and over again, and there's never any accountability for when the thing turns out not to be true. It really just doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is the engagement and that feeling of belonging and participation. That is actually the important part. That's what people are getting out of it. So I don't think they even really care if it turns out to be true or false. I think that that's also because they don't feel a distinct impact of it on their lives right now, right? Some random line item in a budget gets cut. That's not translating into anything that they feel is distinctly impacting them. Maybe at some point, now that they're the government, it will, but we haven't seen that happen yet. It's still very much just theater and abstract right now.
This is probably a good segue to Mike Benz. Tell me about the work that you were doing that caught his attention.
We first encountered him in August of 2022. So we ran this project called the Election Integrity Partnership, where we tried to do this multi-stakeholder research project. Stanford, University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, Graphica, and Digital Forensic Research Lab. We had about 140 or so analysts and students who were working on this project that basically looked at rumors and misinformation related to voting. Was somebody making claims about voting, vote on Wednesday, not on Tuesday, early voting ends and then giving the wrong date? Remember the text to vote stuff that happened in 2016? So we were looking at that kind of stuff. And then we were looking at claims that tried to delegitimize the election. We could also communicate with tech platforms when we needed to and say, hey, this one seems to be going viral. Like, our analysts found this thing. You guys should take a look at it. And again, we have engaged with tech platforms on state actor, takedowns, on child exploitation. Like, we had a long-standing relationship working with platforms when we felt that there was something that they should pay attention to. Hey, this violates your policies, have a look. We had no power to compel them to take any action. I think that's really important to note, right? These are students, student analysts, and academic institutions that basically just have the power to say, hey, you should look. And maybe they trust us a little bit more than the average person clicking that report button, but it is essentially that same process, just sort of a more trusted voice saying it. So we did this for several months. We wrote a 200-page report on it. It came out in March of 2021. Mike Benz began writing about it in August of 2022. He called himself the Foundation for Freedom Online, right? You can make a blog and call yourself whatever you want. And he alleged that what had really happened was that we had been deputized by the federal government, by the deep state specifically, because you'll recall that the federal government was run by Trump appointees in 2020. And he said that we told the platforms to take down 22 million tweets. That was the number that he made these allegations on his blog. And we thought, this is such a fucking crazy allegation that nobody in their right mind could believe this. 22 million tweets. I just want to lay this out there. That is a staggering amount of content. If 22 million tweets about the election disappeared, people would have noticed. So we got that number by going to our public report that sat on the internet, screenshotting and taking out of context a table where we listed the top 10 most viral rumors about the election, like Sharpiegate, like the Dominion theory that Dominion voting machines were changing votes, which you might recall cost Fox News about $750 million in a defamation suit because it was so viral. When we added up the number of tweets after the election, they added up to 22 million. So he took an after election analysis, claimed that it was a during election, cabal. And then as the quote unquote executive director for the Foundation for Freedom Online, credulous right-wing news idiots like Just the News had him on, and they presented him as an authority figure. And once one of them has him on, then the next right-wing outlet can say, Just the News is reporting that. And so you immediately decontextualize, and it goes from being this random guy with a blog who has absolutely no deep insights whatsoever. This man has no internal knowledge at all, but you can sort of trade it up the chain by having outlet after outlet after outlet simply cite the outlet that came before it. And so it obscures the source of the information as being this one random guy who has no actual knowledge of anything and has literally just decontextualized a random table.
It wasn't all that random. He was sort of a white nationalist conspiracy theorist first.
Well, we didn't know that then. Nobody knew that then. That was a sort of funny thing. He presented himself as a former State Department employee, and there was no information on him on the internet. He had scrubbed all of his prior presence was gone. Sometimes when people go into government, they do the work of sort of sanitizing their social media presence. They nuke their Instagram account, they nuke their LinkedIn account before they go through the vetting process. So it wasn't immediately a red flag. He was brought into government as a speechwriter for Ben Carson, if I'm not mistaken, at Housing and Urban Development. His State Department employee page indicated that he was, the deputy assistant, something, some sort of low-level bureaucrat role. But as he began to gain more attention, He started presenting himself as like, when I ran cyber at State Department.
I sort of got into the tech space at the sort of practitioner level of the State Department, where I ran the cyber portfolio for essentially the U.S. foreign policy establishment.
And so he would say cyber-ish sounding words. He renamed himself Mike Benz Cyber on X. Cyber's in the name, got to be cyber guy, right? He'd worked for the State Department for 2 months.
Yeah.
It did come out later, after he had already begun becoming this sort of hero, getting kind of boosted by prominent people on X, including Elon, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah. He's Elon's hero.
I think Brandy Zadrozny at NBC sort of got the initial scoop and realized that he was a YouTube anon, a Gab anon also, just this guy who had gone by the name Frame Game with, as you note, these sort of white nationalist undertones. So for those who don't know, framing is a process by which you take a set of facts and put them in a particular light, right? Particular context. You can take the same set of facts and you can spin them in a particular way to make them resonant for a particular audience. And so frame game is, essentially it's an acknowledgement, right? Like, I am a propagandist and this is how I'm spinning this for this audience. So it was entirely a reframing of his own expertise as a propagandist, as a YouTube anon who was a great spin doctor. All of a sudden was, no, I'm really a guy who ran cyber and I'm telling the truth about these people and their evil censorship cabal. That was the process by which that shift happened.
Right. And so when you talk about 22 million very effective misinformation tweets, or were they all tweets? Or?
The 22 million number was tweets. We looked at a lot of other things. By the way, just to be clear, in the real-time process, we flagged for Twitter 2,700 tweets. So all of the this voting claim is wrong, that delegitimization claim is wrong. It was 2,700 tweets over that 6-month period, not 22 million. Because the sheer scale of it is so staggering. I don't think people really understood how many orders of magnitude off that claim actually was. And the other thing I think it's important to note, taking it down doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's always somewhere else for people to go. It doesn't work because it just turns it into forbidden knowledge. The idea that Stanford Internet Observatory thought that, that 22 million tweets should be nuked from the internet and that would magically transform the political, economy of America. No, that's just not how the world works. And the platforms know this too. So overwhelmingly, what platforms do with information that is tagged as, being a violation of their policies or wrong or whatever, they label it. So 60% of the time with those 2,700 tweets, they did nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. 30% of the time, they put on a label, and 10% of the time, so approximately 270, those came down.
So the actual number is 270. Mike Benz thinks, 22 million sounds better for the script he's writing.
22 million does sound better. How do you say you have because they would say things and Jim Jordan said this too, a censorship operation on a scale the world has never seen before. You can't say that about 270 tweets, but you definitely can say that about 22 million. So you need to anchor people to something that sounds absolutely massive. And then, you make the claim. And the problem is that once the claim is made, and we were subpoenaed, we were asked to turn over all of our records, including
Were you dragged into Congress to speak at a hearing?
No, I was actually not dragged into Congress to speak at a hearing. That's the sort of funny thing. They didn't want you to testify publicly. Because then you can say it's bullshit in real time in front of them. No, they don't want that to happen.
Okay.
They want to haul you in for private interrogation so they can take one sentence out of your 7-hour private interrogation. They don't want you to testify publicly.
Gotcha.
They want the people accusing you to testify publicly. That's how the game is played.
Jim Jordan brought in Mike Benz, not you.
No, he brought in Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger. Mike Benz sat behind them in the hearing room and briefed them to testify.
Well, he has been on Joe Rogan a couple of times, and the most recent one was just a month ago. And I watched/listened to, they go on for 3 hours, and Rogan just kind of goes, "What? Really? Wow," for 3 hours, while Mike Benz takes us through all of the different conspiracy theories that he has. He is taking USAID line items, and he's pointing to this and that, and he's doing exactly what you're talking about, framing things. So For instance, the COVID epidemic was caused by USAID and COINTELPRO, right, which spied on the civil rights movement. That was USAID, right, not the FBI.
There's another term. It's used a lot in fandoms. Retcon. Are you familiar? Retroactive continuity. Retcon is when you take a plot line and people will want to reboot a series, and this question of how do you make a massive plot change like kind of fit. You have to sort of like change a history in the new canon. And so this phenomenon of the retcon is basically, well, we've just decided that this event that you saw never happened, but here in the new timeline, this is what happened, right? And one of the things that you see that I'm always amazed about on social media is the power of the retcon. And I think it's because people don't, they don't necessarily. I think that it is that barrage of I don't remember what happened yesterday, right? You must feel this. I know I do. You have an article and like edits or something. This happens to me a lot, and by the time 3 days go by, you read it and you're like, man, this feels so out of date. This feels like
Yeah.
I'm talking about something that happened 6 years ago. In reality, it was like 3 days, but people have forgotten it already because we've moved on to the next crisis and the next crisis and the next event and the next, and they're not even real crises. They're like manufactured versus, but you're so caught up in following the new thing that you forget the history, you forget what happened. And this makes it very easy to retcon something, to say, no, 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 this is what, this is what actually happened. And this is, I think, with somebody like Rogan, right, who doesn't have deep domain expertise. He's not a historian. He's not going to sit there and say, no, this isn't true. No, and I recall from history that the CIA did that or that the FBI did that. No, you just, it allows for something that sounds plausible in the moment from somebody that they think is cool or trust. And then all of a sudden that becomes reality in that moment, also because it's a reality that they like. It's a reality that's convenient for them. It's a reality that justifies an action that they want to take anyway, or a thing that they want to believe anyway.
As Trump said in the Oval Office, it makes good television.
Yeah, or JD Vance, I remember during they're eating the pets, right? There was like an object lesson in how storytelling and rumors and, performative propaganda works today. It's that he said something very revealing when the Republican governor and the Wall Street Journal said this isn't really happening. He said, I'm happy to tell stories that highlight the bigger issue. And stories is a nice way of saying I'm happy to use a rumor that was on the internet to essentially propagandize about a topic I want to cover anyway. So we went from eating the pets to something about immigration. When it was revealed to be completely false, that didn't matter because the story was what mattered, because the story focused on the issue that he wanted to talk about. So the fact that it turned out not to be true actually really didn't matter because we were here talking about the thing we wanted to talk about. And in the case of USAID, when $50 million in condoms for Hamas turned out to be like, oh, whoops, that was actually $50 million in anti-HIV efforts for Africa or Mozambique, or even I forget the specifics of all of these things because it's too hard to keep up. It doesn't matter because this program has been killed already, right? Because you use the justification of the rage in the moment to take the action that you wanted to take. And then there is that moment, right, where people are beginning to realize that this is destructive, that this is actually quite widely destructive, that as much as many people feel that the government might be bloated, the government might be inefficient, maybe things, programs don't work the way that we would like them to. Maybe there are stupid grants out there in the world, like I'm sure that there are. Everybody has opinions. But what is happening now is it's not a restructuring of government capacity with a strategic eye towards a future capacity for a future world we want to live in. It's just a sort of slash and burn, by a bunch of people who are kind of looking at random line items in a database that they don't actually understand. And so we're kind of governing in response more to conspiracy theories or to not even conspiracy theories. It's a conspiracy without the theory. It's just like the vibes of this line bother us in this moment. And so we're like, okay, well, we're going to axe that. And then when it begins to impact people, they begin to realize that perhaps they've made a mistake. And the question is, what does that translate into? And it's been very interesting to see that that initial sort of angry protest emerging from those Republican congressional districts, and to watch, more importantly, Congress, which is supposed to provide the check, on the executive branch, abdicate its responsibility. Not only the left, which is, in my opinion, embarrassed itself, but has not provided, even on the right, you're seeing them step back, flee the town halls, not do town halls, say we're not going to show up in public and engage our constituents anymore. I think they're starting to realize that reaction has consequences, and you are going to start to see those rifts deepen quite a bit as they begin to realize that this isn't just fantasy bullshit on the internet. This actually, this isn't media stories. This isn't fan fiction. This is your life. These are your benefits. This is your job. This is your community's job, your livelihood, and these are your neighbors that you are putting out of work. And that, I think, I wonder if that begins to jolt some of these folks into realizing that it's not a game, it's not an ARG at all. It is actually quite real.
Well, let's return to the real meat of your book. Do you feel like Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park or Sigourney Weaver from Aliens? Which do you prefer?
I love Aliens. It's one of my favorite franchise.
So Sigourney Weaver in the original film had encountered just one of these creatures. And she goes, just one of these creatures killed my entire crew. And now we're talking about an entire colony of them, right?
Yeah.
And the authorities don't listen to her in time, and things start to go awry. And there's a character like that in most disaster films or monster movies.
Yeah, of course.
I've watched some of your other interviews, and I'm always shocked at how you can be so calm, but basically you saw this slow motion takeover of really the American psyche because of all of this content, the algorithms that are seeking to addict us to their platforms, and what you call the crowd, the way that we're responding as those 7 birds in front of our eyes all become rage bait.
Yeah. I got interested in it when I wanted to run a pro-vaccine counter movement in 2015. I had my first baby in 2013, and as many people do, I turned to Facebook groups. I didn't have any friends with kids at the time. So I joined all the groups for like, how do you feed your baby? What kind of diapers do you use? Why can't he? Why won't he sleep? That was my big issue with my son. And as I mentioned, what matters really is curation. The Facebook reco engine starts tossing things at you. And at the time, it was tossing me anti-vaccine groups. And I thought this was incredibly irritating. I really had no patience for it. What wound up happening, though, was I was living in California, and there was a measles outbreak at Disneyland. And as this was happening, there would be measles exposures on like BART on the trains. If you don't know this, I think people now must know this because we've just had 2 people die in Texas over the last couple of weeks. Measles is incredibly contagious, right? It lingers in the air for hours. And if you bring it home to your unvaccinated child, there are some very real, terrible things that can happen. And most people who wind up hospitalized are infants who are too young to be vaccinated. And so I was just sort of outraged at the fact that this was happening, in 2014 in California. And I wanted to get involved in the effort to strengthen vaccine laws for kindergarten, vaccine requirements for kindergarten in California. We wanted the movement to be very positive, right? We wanted it to be about protecting infants, protecting the people who are medically fragile. We had a couple kids, right, who'd had leukemia, who couldn't go to school during the measles outbreak because their immune systems were compromised. We were trying to talk about how, like, their equities should be part of the conversation. Also, like, why are we letting anti-vaxxers take on the mantle of warrior moms? Why is it not the reverse, actually? So thinking about what does the messaging look like? But then you realize that what people want to talk about, the people who are much more active, are the anti-vaxxers, right? The people who hate the anti-vaxxers. That's where the energy is, right? And so you're trying to build a positive movement. You're trying to get people tweeting nice, positive things about vaccines. But the real energy on the opposition side is the people who can't stand those other people over there. And you're like, we can't be that. But that outgroup tension, that rage, that like, why the fuck are these people making schools less safe for my kid? I feel that personally. I really understand that. And that's where you begin to recognize like what drives people to fight on social media, because that fight is what's going to push your content out there and get it trending, get it recognized, get people seeing it. People get into the fight because they feel a sense of moral outrage, and that moral outrage is framed in the negative as being opposed to those people. And you see this happening right now very, very clearly as Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who we dealt with in California at the time, is now literally the head of Health and Human Services. So now it's like challenging power, right? The man is power. He's not like an opposition fringe nut the way he was in 2015. So I think that is it's seen as a much more like legitimate expression of rage, but it was a very hard thing to wrangle in 2015 because you do realize the way in which building a positive movement is not what social media is made for. It is made for that fight. I didn't get into this as an academic. I got into it as somebody who saw that this was the future. Like this is the present, we were in it. And I was like, this is what it's going to be like for every issue going forward. And that to me I found it alarming, actually. I found it alarming that I could run ads targeting people without disclosing who I was. I actually thought that was extremely weird. That, yes, it had my page, but like, who the hell was I? And didn't people have a right to know that? So I actually got really into advocating for transparency, talking about like, what does ethical curation look like? Why are these things proactively recommended? Who should be able to ad target? Because again, the more effective ad targeting that was happening were the anti-vaccine activists running ad targeting to pregnant women saying vaccines cause SIDS, and if you vaccinate your baby, it's going to die, right? And that was what Facebook was accepting money for at the time. And this question of, is that ethical? Is that something a company should be doing? Was a question that I thought we should be looking at a little bit more deeply. What are the social ramifications for that? I really do deeply understand what it feels like to be in that space as a person who wants to accomplish a political goal and what it takes to accomplish that political goal and what the motivations are for the people in the different spheres of the positive messaging, the negative messaging, the fighting, all the things that go into it. I think that for me was like a very formative experience around what does it take to capture attention and galvanize people. I do unfortunately have I'm gonna have to.
Okay.
Yeah, I have a hard stop today because I've got to go to a different thing. But
well, thank you.
No, it was great chatting with you.
But if you want to do a closing statement, you could. If you want to do a minute.
No, I really appreciate chatting with you. I think it's so interesting to think about this in terms of kayfabe or improvisation. Kate Starbird and I had written a paper on that, and her team thinks about it in terms of like improv theater. I love the ARG metaphor. I feel like that process of discovery is so powerful. It ultimately is this process of participation and relationships. And that I think is something that I think the left really misses, actually. I think that you don't see that back and forth happening. You don't see that sense of intimacy and I'm listening to you, I'm picking up your theories, we're working this into a joint kind of meme or story of the day. You just don't see that happening quite so much on the left. It's still much more this top-down model of I'm giving you a message and you're saying the thing. It's a very different type of media ecosystem, and you're seeing really the difference in influence between this bottom-up style that the right has perfected and this top-down style that the left continues to use. And I think that what's happening for this bottom-up momentum, this participatory movement is just incredibly powerful. And it's not even the future, again, it's the present. We're here. So understanding what that's like and using it as a way of incorporating people into movements is where we really need to be.
Wrestling Darkness is written, recorded, and edited by yours truly, Eric Byler. The music is composed by Michael Brook, while this jazzy improv rendition you are hearing now was performed by David Benene and Stephen Munoz. Wrestling Darkness and other content you will find on the Eric Byler Substack feed are supported by a 501c3 nonprofit called ID Alliance. You can support us by subscribing or by making a tax-deductible donation. Thanks for listening.